First off, after the break, we are coming in with a panel discussion. We have Evelina Vrabie, who is co-founder and CTO at Touco Lab, Matthew Fornaciari, who's the CTO at Gremlin Inc., Barry Frost, CTO at The Room, Rachana Kumar, who is the VP of Engineering at Etsy, and your moderator for this is Glyn Roberts, who is the CTO Digital Solutions at iTechArt Group, and they are going to be discussing feedback loops. Is your process working?
Hi, and welcome everyone to this panel discussion where we will discuss feedback loops. Is your process working? This session will be recorded, and please feel free to add your questions at any time in the chat section to your right. There will be a Q&A section halfway through this talk. So as just going through introductions, I'm Glyn Roberts. I'm emceeing today's session, and I'm CTO of Digital Solutions at iTechArt. With me today is Evelina Vrabie, co-founder and CTO at Touco Lab. So welcome, Evelina. Please give us a short introduction about yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Evelina. Thanks for inviting me to this panel. I'll take that as feedback that I haven't messed up too badly on the previous one. And to break the ice and poke some fun, I'll say that I'm a T-Rex person rather than a T-shaped person. I have a bulky body in software engineering for more than a decade and smaller arms as a variety of things like an entrepreneur, teaching assistant, startup advisor, and more recently CTO in residence for an accelerator. And I am currently in between full-time roles, moving from technical co-founder to engineering manager in what appears to be the fastest growing European startup of all times. So I'm very excited to join them soon.
Great to have you here. And next up, we have the Matthew Fornaciari, if I'm not destroying that name, who's the co-founder and CTO at Gremlin Inc. So welcome, Matthew. Could you please give us a short introduction?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, you nailed it, Matthew Fornaciari, but most people call me Forny because Fornaciari is much harder to say. I'm the CTO and co-founder of Gremlin. I started my career out at Amazon, breaking things over there to make sure that the retail website was available and up and running. Took what I learned and applied it, in the broader sense at Gremlin. Our whole mission is to make the internet a little bit more reliable and help our on-call engineers sleep a little more soundly.
Excellent. And also with us today is Barry Frost, CTO at The Room. So welcome, Barry. Please also give the short intro.
Yeah, hi there. I'm Barry, and I've been CTO for over a decade now. I'm currently at a startup, as you say, called The Room. But previously I was CTO of Gumtree here in the UK and a director of eBay. And before that, I helped a dating business called Vintro grow its platform and its team from scratch. So I was originally a developer, but found I was stronger and could have more impact as a leader supporting my teams. And that's why this topic's really important to me, because I think listening, getting feedback, acting on it is really key to making your team effective. And I'm trying to think of a dinosaur-related thing that I could be. I'm sorry, Evelina, you've won that one. But anyway, we'll come back to that later.
Excellent. And also with us is Rachana Kumar, VP of Engineering at Etsy. So welcome, Rachana. Please also give us a short intro.
Thanks, Glenn. As Glenn already said, I'm VP of Engineering at Etsy, but I also took on an additional role recently as Managing Director for Etsy Mexico. So yeah, me and my family will be moving to Mexico soon. We are currently based in the greater New York area. But before I've been at Etsy for 7 years now, but before that, I also have a master's in public policy and international development. So I was working with the United Nations and a few other nonprofit international organization space, figuring out how to apply technology in social political spaces. So excited to be here.
Excellent. Well, great panel with us today, so I'm very much looking forward to this. So let's kick off talking about feedback loops. So for the very first question, Evelina, I'll kick off with you. What is feedback and why is it important?
Yeah, great question. 2 parts. So I'll give a 2-part answer. So what is feedback? Well, feedback is simply information about how someone is doing in their pursuit of a particular goal. And it comes in many shapes, 3 of which I know about. First is appreciation, which means recognizing and rewarding someone's great work. Second is coaching, and the more hands-on version, mentoring, which means helping someone expand their knowledge, capabilities, skills. And third, evaluation. And now that's a word that carries a lot of emotional charge, like fear and some defensiveness. And I think it's the one people think of when they hear the word feedback. It's important to know feedback is not just evaluation. In fact, evaluation is a retrospective. It happens after coaching, mentoring, and appreciation have been offered continually for some time. And also, self-reflection is the type of internal evaluation, and that doesn't have to be as stressful. And the second part of the question was why feedback important. Obviously, I can't do justice to this answer, but here's the TLDR version. I'll go back to the three forms of feedback. So appreciation motivates people. And that's important because motivation is one of the two key factors for high performance. The other one, work satisfaction. Even more, appreciation people. It's a sense of belonging to a team, to an organization. And secondly, coaching and mentoring, as I said, not only helps someone improve, but also is a good opportunity to strengthen and balance relationship at work and to create a safe space to address feelings. And lastly, evaluation and self-reflection are important because they align us to a set of standards and expectations, both inner and external. And it helps us maintain perspective about what's valuable to accomplish for ourselves and for the company. So in other words, it connects our individual aspirations with the goals.
Excellent. That's very thorough. So that was excellent. Thank you for that. So then moving on with Rachana, what does good feedback look like, would you say? And obviously we'll go through all the afterwards.
Yeah. For me, like, the core essence of a good feedback is that it's specific. Like, you don't end with like clear examples. We just, I think it's true for a lot of companies. Like, if March is the financial year end, like, we go through a full feedback cycle, assessment, performance assessment, all those things. So for me, the core essence of a good feedback is that you can, whether positive or area of improvement, that you can give a clear example as to why someone did something well or not so well, and what is the course of action after that. What it doesn't have to be like, as the feedback giver, that you are like suggesting exactly what they need to do. It needs to be a dialogue on how can we as a team a lot of times collectively improve this. So for me, one is specific example, but two is also kind of next plan of action a little bit. But it also depends. Sometimes people need time to process the feedback, especially if it's not positive feedback. Then thinking about plan of action immediately might not be the best course. Let them take the feedback, digest the information. Maybe they come back to you. Then you both have a more active discussion. That's one thing. And the second thing I will add is the delivery of feedback. The way people process information might not be the same for everyone. So a good feedback also takes into consideration who is the person receiving the feedback and tailoring your feedback methodology and the way you deliver it based on that person.
Excellent. Barry, do you have any additional thoughts or comments?
Yeah, I think the key point here is when you're looking at feedback, it's thinking about could you turn it into a kind of coaching opportunity? Is this something where someone's come to you with that feedback, and rather than immediately rush to kind of solve that problem for them, ask them questions, ask them open questions, and try and help them solve that problem and go on from there. So for me, really good feedback is one where you've had the opportunity to help them unlock their problem themselves.
Brilliant. And Matthew, essentially, what does good feedback look like for you?
I mean, what else can I say? Everybody's already kind of covered it, but I think the important part is, I think Rachana said it, but different people will want their feedback in different shapes. And, Evelina mentioned that there are 3 types of feedback. I think the one thing I'll add is making sure that the type of feedback you're providing is what, the person you're giving it to is expecting. So if you're trying to give them coaching, but really they want evaluation, you're going to have some mismatched expectations. It's not going to be received as well. Or if all they want is appreciation, there's just the opportunity for some diversion there that you maybe want to make sure that what you're giving is what the person wants.
Excellent. And Evelina, essentially, how often should you give feedback, and what does good feedback look like for you?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I think timing, there are 2 things related to timing. One is frequency and one is urgency. So as a rule of thumb, I think more frequent directionally correct feedback. So directionally correct means explicitly saying whether you're going in the right direction or you need to change course. So more frequent directionally correct feedback is better than more accurate but less frequent feedback. So in other words, what matters is consistency and iteration. That's what makes feedback good. And secondly, urgency. Now, like I said, they're time related but not the same. And urgency means how soon you should ask or provide feedback. And surprise, surprise, the answer is also sooner than later. But there is an optimal value for it, which is around 30%. And this value comes from different sources of truth, so to speak. One is that I like is Trello's 30-60-90 framework, which says that you should ask for feedback when you're 30%, 60%, and 90% into a task. And another one, which is my favorite, comes from decision theory, the stopping rule, which is an optimization problem to help us decide whether to stop or continue a certain task based on where we are now. And it's useful in many other real life scenarios, like choosing a mortgage or hiring a candidate. So, but there's a caveat with both urgency and frequency of feedback. So the caveat is that sometimes when you have one or a few overly negative or overly positive voices that makes us provide feedback immediately without considering the wider context. So I know a saying which applies here, which is when one person tells you that you're a horse, smile at them. If 2 people tell you that you're a horse, give it some thought. But if 3 people say you're a horse, then maybe go buy a saddle. So I think that the best solution for this is the same as for impulse spending, which I'm familiar with, which is to add friction or insert a pause. For example, going for a walk, process the information, and then write it down. Like write down why we decided to communicate that feedback.
Excellent. Okay, yeah, the horse example is definitely something I'm going to remember. So Barry, what are the other types of feedback and how are they related?
Sure. Well, I think there are many different types of feedback we receive in our roles as technology leaders. And I think we've talked, probably the most common is between you and your direct reports, your people. But I think if you manage managers, you should also be looking at skip level conversations. So you want to get feedback from your managers, direct reports as well. Things like, are there any process or performance issues which I don't have insight into? How are the managers themselves performing? Or is there anything I know or should know that the managers perhaps aren't passing up the chain? I think with skip levels, it's really important to consider kind of the people and their safety and anonymity in that situation. You need a safe space so they can be honest with you about their managers, but it can be really valuable hearing further down the chain. And what about teams? Well, if your teams are using Scrum or other methodologies, I think it's really helpful to run a demo at the end of a sprint. And that's feedback in terms of showing progress and getting feedback from people outside your team. You want to keep stakeholders and the rest of the company involved, so the team also gets that valuable feedback to help them course correct and know what they want to prioritize for the next sprint so that they're delivering the highest value. After that, most teams will probably have a retrospective. And I think the retro is one of the most valuable things teams can do to incrementally improve their effectiveness. And that's what this is all about. It's best to get that feedback when things are still fresh after the sprint. The team can then reflect together what's working, what could be improved, how could they be more effective together. And the team should say what they appreciate about each other's contributions. I really love it when you celebrate successes, you get a yay, or if there's a gripe, boos. I think it's really nice having that, and of course capturing those things and following up on any actions and that feedback. And if you're running several teams, if you've got a larger set of teams, I found a regular scrum of scrums type meeting can help. And it's designed so that your teams between them can share feedback and coordinate. And the aim is to improve the interface or boundaries between teams. So you have probably one person from each team sharing feedback from their team, and then actions can be captured in a scrum of scrums backlog for improvement. And if your teams are hopefully kind of cross-functional and you have those skills spread across multiple teams, I like having kind of guilds or communities of practice, some people call it, which can be really helpful. So you might have your front-end engineers meeting to discuss the latest things with React, or perhaps a guild on test-driven development that can be shared across different engineering disciplines. So you want to kind of get alignment across teams to improve their processes, share knowledge between teams, or align on technology choices, the latest technology they'd like to be using and try out. And ultimately see if they can help each other if there's a problem there one team's having. Well, once a quarter, I like to use kind of team health checks. And those are really focused on the team effectiveness and ultimately improvement. So you're asking the team to reflect a bit more deeply than a retro on where do we focus our efforts together? What are we optimizing for, really crucially? So you could use things like surveys, but really I like feedback face-to-face. You compile that data, you can visualize it, and then share that back to the team. You want the team to help themselves be more self-aware. It's not about comparing across teams, it's about the team themselves. And finally, things go wrong sometimes, and you need to find out what happened. So I like to hold what are called kind of blameless postmortems. So you have an incident, something's gone wrong, let the dust settle, and then meet as soon as possible after that. And it's really important to state you're working on an assumption that everyone acted with the very best intentions. So you can remove that fear of looking stupid, or some people might be afraid of being fired, and a bit afraid of that. So you really want to encourage that honesty and hear the facts and establish a timeline of the what, not the who. You're focusing on learning and improving together, not on scapegoating someone. So those are kind of a few examples. What I think relates these different types of feedback is a focus on improvement in the future, whether it's the individual, a team, or a process.
Excellent. Yeah, I mean, celebrating wins seems to be the one area that people always seem to forget. So I think that's quite regular. And I believe there's some problems with the chat window in Crowdcast at the moment, but don't worry, I've got backup questions, guys, so there's not going to be any dead space. So continuing on with that question about the type of feedbacks, Matthew, do you have anything else to add at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, I think Barry covered it pretty well, but the idea of team-based and process-based feedback is really important. I think oftentimes when people hear feedback, they think of that one-to-one feedback. They think of, what does my direct manager think? What sort of feedback do they have for me, and vice versa? But the whole idea of team-based and process-based feedback is something that I think gets ignored some of the time. Especially, at smaller scales, it's incredibly important. Gremlin has grown from, one person, two people to, 75 over the course of 5 years. And I think what we often forget is that every single person you add at that sort of scale really changes how things function. And so continuously checking in, Barry mentioned the retrospectives, that sort of thing, but checking in on what's working and what isn't is really informative at those stages in a company, making sure that you're asking for that feedback, that you're doing, whether it's a 360 or however you get that sort of feedback, making sure that leadership is actually leading, that they're doing the right things, that they're setting in place the right processes, and that they're willing to, gather that feedback and make changes based on what they get. That's something that I think that oftentimes we think just in the one-to-one, and really the team is made up of each of these different individuals, and every time you add somebody to it, every time somebody leaves, every time you change something, you need to make sure, go back, evaluate, is it working? Is this something that is helpful for everyone? And you may get conflicting views, but you need to at least ask.
Absolutely. Okay, great then. So, Evelina, what's the link between feedback, recognition, and reward from your view?
Yes, that's a hard question. Recognition. Well, recognition is a consequence, right, of someone having desired behavior or matching or exceeding expectations and delivering successful results. And recognition is important for performance as well. And for example, research has found that recognition makes people more likely to stay with a company and more likely to feel committed to the company. And that's important because committed employees deliver 60% more effort than uncommitted ones, right? Now, positive feedback or appreciation is a reward in itself, but it's not sufficient to retain top performance. We also need sponsorship and advocacy to help us move towards personal career goals, be that status, visibility, recognition. And I like how the BCHEPS framework, for example, groups these last three, status, visibility, and recognition, under significance. And they found that it's one of the 6 core needs of humans at work. So I have a blog post where I'm sharing some of these links to frameworks, and I'll be sharing it on Slack afterwards. And yeah, the other thing is, it's hard to sustain a culture of recognition long term, right? Why is it hard? Well, I can think of at least a few cases that I've noticed, especially around appreciation and coaching. So what tends to happen over time is that we start putting too much focus on evaluation and too little on appreciation and coaching. And this leads to something I heard called the MAD syndrome, which is a mutual appreciation deficit. And this is when we start hearing folks say that they don't get enough feedback. But I think they might get enough evaluation, but what they need is someone to notice and care not only about what they have to do better, but also how hard they're working, right? And for example, we at Touco used Slack plugin called Hey Taco to show appreciation to each other when we had small wins or we accomplished some tasks. And at first, it might feel awkward, but it's not a hard practice to start. It does, however, require conscious effort to sustain it over time, and especially in remote situations. And lastly, I think coaching, in my experience so far, has been really underappreciated. And I know that most companies listed in their nice to have organizational values, but they rarely reward it, formally at least. So sometimes that doesn't even count towards someone's evaluation. And I think it's because most organizations don't estimate the cost, or better said, the investment they need to make for their teams and especially their leaders to do it well. And coaching doesn't come naturally to everyone, especially those of us who invest heavily in our technical acumen. But software engineering is the science of making computers work well. However, it's psychology, anthropology, behavioral science that are needed to make humans work well. So how many technology leaders have a natural interest in time to research these fields? And how many are supported by their organizations when they do so?
Absolutely. And Rachana, your views of the link between feedback with recognition and reward?
Yeah, I kind of think of them as three separate things in some sense. I think linking once a year, like at least most companies do it, right? Like they try to link all three of them. Like if you do a performance assessment cycle once a year, you maybe like you do 360. At least I can speak to how we do it at Etsy. Like we do a 360 feedback, and then it can come in form of recognition if there is a promotion, but it's also tied to reward in terms of merit increases and bonus and equity and things like that. So once a year, it's fine if all three of them come together. One philosophy, at least I have for my direct reports, is any feedback they get during the reward season shouldn't be a surprise for them, because it should have happened through the year from my side, like so often, and that it just feels like it's all coming together, right? So based on that, my suggestion is that feedback and recognition should happen on an ongoing basis, and reward should always not be tied to that, because I feel like if you always tie reward to it, it's hard. A really good feedback culture, like Barry mentioned a lot of different ways you can do feedback, it can be really productive only when the group and the team has a psychological safety to give the feedback on an ongoing basis. You might have like 20 processes, but if the psychological safety is not there, the feedback will not be as effective and honest. So always not tying it to reward, I think is important. Once a year, great. And the second thing I'll add is like Etsy is one of the first companies that kind of really made the blameless postmortem culture that Barry mentioned popular in the tech space. And recognition doesn't always have to be one positive, right? To like we do postmortem incidents like on an ongoing basis, but once a year we also have something, we give the biggest tech failure of the year, like a 3-armed sweater award, which is basically, we are a crafts company, so instead of knitting a 2-armed sweater, it's like you knit a 3-armed sweater. But also sometimes celebrating wins is really important, but also when building a culture of celebrating failure in a way that it doesn't make people afraid to fail is also really important.
Absolutely. I mean, I've definitely been in organizations in my life, or seen organizations that do commit the rewards or failures back sessions, which they only get once a year anyway, so there's no opportunity to address or fix them. Okay then, so moving on with Matthew then, what are the next steps after feedback has been collected? What should you or organizations be doing next?
Yeah, absolutely. It's actually, for me at least, a two-part question. There's, are you the one receiving the feedback, or are you the one giving the feedback? If you're the one giving the feedback, I think it makes a lot of sense, and I've seen a lot of success with setting up some time to follow up. Once the person has taken the time to digest that feedback, assimilate it, has asked any sort of questions, you want to make sure that you give them a touch point later on down the road and say, hey, we're going to follow up on this in 2 weeks, in a month, in however long it is, 30, 60, 90 days, if that's what you want to do. But once you've provided that feedback, making sure that you, like we mentioned earlier, continuously check in on that at some regular cadence. I don't think it's very effective to just give feedback and then be like, cool, go run with that. Do what you will. You've got to give it and then check back in and say, look, you're making great progress here, or hey, we talked about this. I haven't seen the sort of improvement that I would expect. Here's what my expectations are. If you're the one receiving the feedback, I think I touched on it real quickly, but digest. Don't immediately respond. A lot of times that comes off as an emotional response, especially if it's hard feedback. So take the time, say, yes, okay, I understand. Ask the questions that you need to ask. Make sure you clarify. And if your manager or whoever's giving you the feedback doesn't set a time to come check back in, say, hey, here's what I plan to do. After you digested, say, here's what I plan to do. I'd love to check in with you after X amount of time. This is, what my expectations are, what I'm interpreting this as. Is that correct? Is that your understanding as well? There's also, I actually just went through performance reviews, executive performance reviews. So there's also this idea of, okay, what if you receive feedback that's conflicting? So I actually got some feedback that was like, you did great at this, and another piece of feedback that was like, you didn't do very well at this. And I was like, I don't quite know how to rectify this. And so I asked, who is the person who was giving me feedback. I said, is it okay if I approach these people? Is it fine for me to be able to go ask them to add a little more context to this? And I did, and it helped me rectify things. So if you get feedback that is possibly conflicting, or you kind of can't make heads or tails of, if it's possible, I'd say go to the source. Go ask the questions, not just from the person who's taking that feedback, digesting it down and providing it to you, but go ask, if it's a 360, go ask that person directly and see sort of what their what their perspective is, get all the context that you need to actually improve. We talked about it earlier, but the whole idea behind feedback is improvement. So if you don't have the right context, it can just come off, I don't know, you can maybe misinterpret it. So, make sure that you ask the right questions, even if it's hard.
Sure. Great. And Barry, what are your normal next steps after the feedback's been collected?
Yeah, I think I really liked Matthew's point about, pause, don't immediately rush to kind of have a response. I think when we're senior, sometimes that can be the case that we have to have an answer. So it's, reflect, think about it. I think also if it's negative to me as a leader, I think you need to detach yourself and try really hard not to be defensive about it and argue back. I think trying to understand that the person who's giving you that feedback could be quite vulnerable, that they've pushed back to you. So it's kind of stopping, thinking, and then kind of paraphrasing back what they said and trying to get a bit more clarity, clarifying, ask for some more examples, hopefully in terms of what's happened. And ultimately, you want to kind of create some kind of accountability for that feedback. And I think going back to something I said earlier, is this an opportunity to coach this person, but also to receive coaching yourself? So you need a trusted kind of peer or a CTO craft coach, maybe someone who you can approach to actually ask for some a second opinion, a bit of feedback for yourself. I think that's really important so that we can improve from that as well.
Brilliant.
Just
okay then. So, go ahead.
One more thing on the topic. I think we focus a lot on like either the negative or the constructive. But if somebody tells you you're doing something fantastic or you're doing something great, say thank you. That's one of the things I have struggled with most is like people will give me good feedback and I'm sort of just like, yeah, cool. Tell me what I can fix. But acknowledging the things that you're doing well is also incredibly important, sort of in that same vein of celebration, right?
Absolutely. Okay, wonderful then. So I think Crowdcast still got some chat issues, so I've got you all to myself. So firstly, I'll probably like to continue on with Rachana with what you're talking about, safety with feedback. So how can you enable psychological safety throughout the feedback process? And it's probably worth asking everybody's opinion on this, but we'll start off with you, Rachana.
Yeah, I think I'm always very intrigued by the psychological safety topic, right? Because it's not something that happens just overnight by itself. Like you need to first build trust within a team. Related to feedback, I'm a big fan of radical candor, where you are giving them direct feedback, but it also comes from a place of, you care about the team, you care about this person's growth. We had a speaker. Google had done, Google, the organization, had done a study on what makes teams most successful. And the top thing that came out was psychological safety. And we had a speaker who was leading that effort at Google come and talk to us. And they were saying that psychological safety is not always keeping everyone happy necessarily on the team. That's not what it means. That like you're keeping people engaged in the work, but also creating a safe space where they can express their opinions respectfully but freely. So it's how do you build trust over time? That is not always that doesn't always mean everyone's just always happy. It's they trust each other and they respect each other's work.
Absolutely. Evelina, what are your views on enabling psychological safety when throughout the feedback process?
Yeah, I think we have to start at the top, right? They say a leader is one who knows the way, goes the way, and shows the way. But I can think of some situations that typically get in the way of that psychological safety, both when you receive feedback and when you give feedback. And so, for example, one of them is that when we get negative feedback, we're inclined to reply immediately. And that's normal. We're all emotional human beings. And it takes a conscious effort to listen with the intent of understanding, not to defend ourselves. And that's very hard. And understanding the other person's perspective is helpful because it can help us uncover our blind spots and our biases. We all have them. And it's great to be self-aware, but nobody can be self-aware 100% of the time. And the other one is it's really hard to receive feedback when the relationship with the person that is providing feedback is not there. And this situation can happen, for example, when we haven't established rapport with them. We don't trust them, or we don't believe they're credible enough to give us that feedback in the first place. And it's the same as in a conflict situation. The solution is to disentangle the who from the what, and the intent of the feedback from our worst assumptions and our worst distortions that might be caused by the fact we have a negative relationship with that person. And it's also okay to just accept the feedback but not act on it, right? We can either ignore it or leave it for later, save it for later, when we get out of that intense emotional state. And the third point is it's hard to receive feedback when we're in an altered state of mind. And I don't know if there is a solution for this one, but the one that I apply is to see challenges as opportunities to be curious, learn, and improve. Because success is not always the direct result of either intelligence or hard work. There's a big component of luck that all of us tend to underestimate. And what's more, a few kind words can help us get out of the rut, and a few bad ones can sink us further into that rut. And that's why having a support network and a good manager, a good coach, mentor, advocate makes a real difference for well-being, performance, and ultimately success. So, encouragement and greatness, kindness begets greatness. That's my point of view.
Excellent. And it seems we start to have some questions coming through as well from the audience. I think Crowdcast issues are now solved. So we'll try and get through some of them before we finish off this talk. So let's start off with, so for Matthew, how does role power play into the way that you deliver feedback?
Yeah, I think I'm going to try to interpret this question. I'm not quite sure exactly what's meant by role power, but I'm interpreting it as sort of that power inequity, possibly. So how does role power play into that is just being, I think just being humble and being straightforward about it, approaching it as though you're not necessarily judging with giving the feedback, especially if it is, a little bit more of like negative feedback, but really approaching it from the direction of this is to improve. Like, this is what I would see from you. This is what I would expect to see from you in order for you to level up and move up in terms of your career. So, I mean, I think just being very honest about the fact that you are very invested in this person, and that's the reason that you're providing this feedback, not that you are, judging from up on high or something like that. It's not really the intention, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think if CEOs, for example, get involved in the feedback process, they're normally much more separated from the day-to-day, and therefore their feedback could be seen as more weightful, even though they're less close. So therefore they'll only identify the negatives that's happened throughout the year, but none of the positives, because they don't hear about it if everything's good.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Okay, wonderful then. So one for Rachana. How has the Blameless retrospective evolved in Etsy since the original blog article?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I feel like all processes in a company, right? Like when I joined Etsy, we had less than 100 engineers. We are over 600 engineers right now. So as we scale, a lot of our things had to scale as well. So one of the things we have done with the Blameless retrospective or postmortem is that in the beginning, like when I joined Etsy, all of us used to go to that to see, like, if the site went down or something, what happened. Now there are a lot of, like, there's a full training program if you want to be a facilitator for the Blameless postmortem. If you want to hold a postmortem yourself and become a facilitator, how does that work, and who are the key players that need to be in the room? Right now virtual room, but also like there is like 600 people can't attend the same meeting. It doesn't make it unless until it's all hands or something. So we really try to, always a work in progress, evolve the process as the company is scaled. That's one thing. The second thing is also we want to look at when something fails in a blameless way, but that doesn't mean like, well, as we became a public company and grew, it doesn't mean like people are not accountable to hit their goals and to deliver on their goals, right? Like, so we used to call it as like blameless culture. Then how does that loop into feedback loops, right? Like when there is an incident failure or a technical failure, of course we want to see what went wrong with the system. It's a system failure, so of course there could be a human error in the system failure, but that was then swinging into, oh, then is no one accountable when, like, say we don't hit business goals and all those things. So we had to figure out as the company scaled how to separate both of them a little bit. You're still accountable for, like, at least as a VP, I'm very much accountable for my gross business goals. There is no doubt about that. But when things don't go well, it's not because of one person not doing something. It's collectively, it's looking at it as a system failure. And the last thing we did, just like I think a year ago, was we got a couple of outside experts who think of system failures as, that's their profession. They write books on it. And they kind of try to also help us evolve our postmortem process as we've, scaled as a company.
Fantastic. Okay, then, so the last audience question then, we've got about 3.5 minutes left, so we'll try and keep these quite quick. So I'll start with you, Barry. As a leader, if the people you work with are not seeking feedback, coaching, and don't seem very interested in improving, do you keep trying?
I think the question's a really good one because it does happen, and I think it starts with that position of someone senior is coming to them, and some people don't really work very well under those circumstances. They feel very vulnerable in terms of that situation. So I think it can start very simple in terms of building that trust. To think about the type of feedback that you're giving. Start off with all the positives. Yeah, keep doing that. That's great. Bit by bit, building up a relationship with that person. It doesn't necessarily, as we say, need to be a negative feedback loop. It can also be a positive. So I think kind of building that trust up, trying to find out, I've observed this. This is a behavior I really liked. Keep doing more of that. And over time, hopefully that will improve so that the person might not like a specific style of feedback. Keep working on it. Keep trying different techniques because ultimately, it's about trying to help them improve and the team around them. I think that's probably what I'd say.
Excellent. And just a very final question then. Go ahead. I was about to say final question for everybody was just like roundup tips and summing off. So go ahead, Evelina.
No, just.
Oh, no, I think she's gone.
Oh.
Sorry, try again, Evelina. No, never mind. It's too early for. Okay, just very quick summary tips there, just from each of you. I'll start off with Matthew. Just any final roundup tips, like 20, 30 seconds long max, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was actually going to weigh in on the, as a leader, if people are not seeking feedback, do you keep trying? Absolutely. That's your job as a people manager, is to continue to try to foster that environment, to provide that psychological safety, to provide an environment where, honestly, to even model it, to model the fact that you are looking for feedback, that you are pulling, the concept of that book, Thanks for the Feedback, talks about push versus pull. Pull is a much better way to receive feedback if somebody is already open to it. So trying to continue to foster that, that's part of your job.
Excellent. Evelina, we've got you back now. So any final tips you want to provide us?
Yeah, I wanted to say that sometimes there might be hidden psychological reasons behind a situation like this. For example, there's a form of ADD, attention deficit disorder, called rejection sensitive dysphoria, which means people have extreme emotional sensitivity and even pain to the perception of being criticized and rejected. So honestly, I don't know how we're equipped as engineering managers to deal with that. And we need better training programs to coach us and our teams to welcome and support more neurodiverse teams, like in this ADD example, and be prepared to change the organizational environment to help them succeed. Something worth considering.
Excellent. Okay, great. So for the audience then, please check out the Slack channel of the CTO CraftCon Delivery One. All of us will be on there after for any follow-up questions you may have. Thank you to our panelists today for talking with us, Evelina, Barry, Matthew and Rachana. It's been excellent. And yeah, essentially connect with our panelists and me after the session on social media as well. So thank you all for joining, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.